The film opens with Susan Morrow overseeing the opening of a new exhibit at her art gallery. The scene is filled with provocative and unsettling imagery, setting the tone for the movie. Susan, dressed elegantly, moves through the gallery, her expression detached. She appears successful but disconnected from the vibrant, chaotic art surrounding her. After the event, she returns home to her modern but cold and empty mansion, where her loneliness becomes palpable. Later that night, Susan receives an unexpected package from her ex-husband Edward Sheffield. Inside, she finds a manuscript titled Nocturnal Animals, dedicated to her. The dedication surprises her, and she becomes curious about the content. As she begins to read, the scene transitions seamlessly into the narrative of the novel, drawing both Susan and the audience into a darker, more intense world. The novel introduces Tony Hastings, a mild-mannered family man, driving through the desolate Texas desert with his wife, Laura, and teenage daughter, India. The atmosphere is serene, but there's an undercurrent of tension as the family navigates the empty, open road. The isolation of the setting adds to the growing sense of unease. Their peaceful drive is abruptly interrupted when another car approaches aggressively from behind. The car, driven by Ray Marcus and his two accomplices, starts tailgating and harassing Tony's car, eventually forcing them off the road. Ray and his gang stop their car, blocking Tony's path. Ray, with a menacing demeanor, approaches Tony's car and starts a seemingly polite conversation that quickly turns threatening. Despite Tony's attempts to defuse the situation, the tension escalates. Ray's accomplices, Lou and Turk, intimidate Laura and India, forcing them out of the car. As Tony helplessly watches, Lou and Turk forcibly separate him from his family, dragging Laura and India into Ray's car. Ray then speeds off into the darkness with them, leaving Tony stranded and powerless on the deserted highway. Tony encounters a man who offers to help him after his wife Laura and daughter India have been abducted by Ray Marcus and his gang. The man takes Tony to a quiet desert road, which initially seems like a potential break in his dire situation. However, the man betrays Tony by stealing his car and bring back Ray Marcus to look for Tony. They then continue searching for Tony in the desert, leaving Tony stranded and increasingly desperate. Despite the odds, Tony manages to evade the man and survive in the harsh desert environment. Tony eventually reaches a police station where he can report the abduction and seek further assistance. The next morning, Tony is found by Bobby Andes, a grizzled, no-nonsense detective who takes an immediate interest in the case. Together, they begin a relentless search for Laura and India. The tension builds as they follow a trail of clues that leads them to a remote area where they make a grim discovery. The bodies of Laura and India, brutally murdered and discarded like trash. Tony's devastation is complete, and his grief quickly turns to a desire for vengeance. As Susan reads these horrific events, her discomfort grows. The novel's intensity starts to bleed into her reality, causing her to reflect on her life, particularly her failed marriage to Edward. Flashbacks reveal their passionate but troubled relationship, filled with arguments over Edward's writing career and Susan's growing doubts about their future together. Back in the novel, Tony becomes obsessed with finding Ray Marcus and bringing him to justice. Bobby Andes, who is revealed to be terminally ill, is just as determined, seeing this case as his final stand. They track down Ray and his accomplices, but the legal process is frustratingly slow, and the evidence against them is weak. As they confront Ray, Tony's inner conflict is evident. He's torn between his desire for justice and the moral implications of revenge. Susan's reading is interrupted by flashbacks to her past with Edward. We see scenes of their life together, from their initial romance to the eventual deterioration of their marriage. Edward, once a sensitive and idealistic young writer, becomes increasingly insecure and frustrated as Susan begins to question their future. The emotional weight of these memories adds depth to Susan's character, highlighting her internal struggles. As Tony and Bobby's investigation deepens, the tension in the novel reaches its peak as Tony is faced with the opportunity to confront Ray directly. Bobby, now too ill to continue, leaves Tony to face Ray alone, pushing him to take justice into his own hands. This scene is filled with psychological tension as Tony must decide whether to exact revenge or find another path. As Susan nears the end of the manuscript, she is deeply affected by the parallels between the novel and her own life. The story forces her to confront her regrets and the choices she made, particularly her decision to leave Edward. She becomes consumed by the realization that she might have sacrificed true happiness for a life of superficial comfort and security. After finishing the manuscript, Susan reaches out to Edward, hoping to reconnect and perhaps find some closure. They agree to meet for dinner. The scene is tense as Susan, now more vulnerable and reflective, arrives at the restaurant. She waits, her nerves building, but Edward never shows up. The scene ends with Susan alone, her reflection in a glass of wine symbolizing the emptiness of her current life and the full impact of her choices. The film closes with Susan leaving the restaurant, her expression a mix of sorrow and resignation. The novel has forced her to confront the darkest parts of herself and her life. She walks away alone, leaving the audience to ponder the consequences of regret, loss, and the paths we choose in life.